We usually think of worship as music, and we usually think of it as what you do for a few minutes on Sunday morning, with the choir in the background. But biblically, I mean, all of life is worship, and so we just like to try to challenge people to say, okay, how can your work, be worship? How can you go to work and lead at work with an attitude and spirit of worship? And um, again, we're not the only ones who, are thinking and talking in these ways. Again, you're going to have lots of great people on this week, but as our team thinks through it, just a few quick things that kind of outline how we think of work as worship. I mean, for one, work is good, right? In the beginning, God created everything, including work. And so that wasn't a punishment. It wasn't, something that we just have to do. I mean, God created work for Adam and Eve in a good way. He wanted them to tend the garden. And you guys have probably studied that, heard that, are familiar with that. But I think it's always important to be reminded work is good. God created work, and it was a good thing. Now, like everything else in the world, sin came in and corrupted that work, so now work doesn't always honor God. In fact, sometimes instead of worshiping the God who created us, we tend to worship work, or we get our identity from work. And I mean, again, sin's corrupted everything, including, a great institution like marriage, and all of a sudden sin comes in and it creates, selfishness and division and divorce. And so there's things that corrupt, these good things that God created, and work is no exception. But when we look in Scripture, we see that Jesus redeems that work. We don't have to work to earn God's approval. Thank goodness. I mean, that's the key to the gospel, is it's not based on our own works. And so God now redeems this work that we do to say, okay, well, if you're not working to earn God's favor, then what are you working to do? Well, it's to bring Him glory. And so we say, okay, if you're going to work as worship, then it's only because Jesus came along to redeem that work. And we get the chance to bring Christ into our work every day. I love the word being an ambassador, and there's times throughout Scripture we're referred to as ambassadors, or we can be Christ's ambassadors. So I love that idea that as we work as worship, it's because we're taking Christ with us in through our day. And then the last couple quick things I'd say about this is, God can use us through our work. I mean, you think about in all of Scripture and all of our life, God is working through relationships. And what better place than work? I mean, you've got relationships with coworkers and with people above you, people below you, vendors, customers. I mean, there's so many different relationships, but all of a sudden God can use, those relationships to form us spiritually, and then to work through us to reach others. But also, I think another part of that that's really important that sometimes we forget is God does more with our work than we can imagine. I mean, He's given us, especially those of us as business leaders, to hire and employ people to help make the economy strong in our area, or maybe even nationally or globally, to not only provide jobs, but to help communities flourish and help cities prosper. So there's this opportunity that we have as Christians, not just to be focused on our own needs or our own self-interest, or even just the employees around us, but to realize God is using us and our businesses for a great kingdom cause. So I just, again, that phrase may not be one you're used to, but we just use that phrase "work as worship" a lot, because we feel like there's an opportunity to worship God even through the work that we do every day.
Uh, I'll, you know, I know that you also have a point about the 8 tenets of worship. Is that what you were talking
Well,
about?
yeah, and I was kind of chronicling through those. I didn't number them, but yeah, that was kind
Oh,
of part of that right there.
okay. All right. Well, I understand as well that you have also an additional two more points of interest you'd like to share with us.
Well, yeah, and I guess so for us as a ministry, as we think about these Christian business leaders that are out there trying to, again, so diligently serve and allow their businesses to prosper, um, we look at it like the fact that for us as a ministry, we're not we're not the hero, but we certainly want to be a friend or an advocate for those Christian business leaders. We know that a lot of Christian business leaders are wondering, okay, how does my faith influence, what I can do in my company, so that the people that I'm around, the employees particularly, can flourish at work and flourish at home, and that flourishing would lead to not only a successful business, but again, a successful community. So I believe with all my heart that if you're a Christian and you're in business, you have that desire, you have that thought of how can my faith really have an impact on the people around me. But the reality is, and we all live in a very real and tactile world, there are things that get in the way of that desire. And I think one of the biggest, if not the biggest things out there for our teams is just stress. And you think about this last year with pandemic and political issues and racial conversations and just all sorts of things that are creating, division and hardships, in terms of just kind of the day-to-day stresses. those stresses, they impact your employees personally, they impact your employees at a family level, and then that impacts your business. And it makes it hard for the business to flourish and prosper when there's stress and anxiety happening within the team members around you. So we're not pretending to be the only, one size fits all magic bullet here, but our ministry wants to come alongside and say, okay, how can we help that Christian business leader be more faithful and be more intentional? And so all that to say, we have this phrase that we also use a lot, that not everybody has a pastor, but almost everybody has a boss. And you think about that, there's a lot of people that, again, are maybe at your companies or friends of yours or neighbors of yours, and they may not go to church. They may not have a pastor or a church that they call home, but if they go to work, they probably have a boss. And if that boss, has a faith and is following Christ, then there's an opportunity that boss has to influence the people around them way more than that a pastor may have, in terms of the proximity and the time they spend around each other each week. So we just keep trying to remember and remind others that we're working with. Again, not everybody has a pastor, but almost everybody has a boss. So as a Christian, as a business leader, as a business influencer, how does that faith, ripple out into the people you're serving? Because again, you have, again, influence and an opportunity maybe greater than any pastor in your city or your community would have, only because you're around those people. They're looking to you for employment, for a paycheck, for direction, and you can't be everything to those people. It's not like you're supposed to be their pastor and their counselor and their friend and their boss and all of it, but your faith does have a chance to ripple through the way you lead, the way you interact, the way you engage people. And so I think if we as Christian business leaders take that to heart and walk into the offices or walk into our teams on a day-to-day basis with that as our mindset, then we see our job as differently than just being the boss. We see our opportunity as that influencer and as that ambassador that Christ calls us to be. So that's what gets us excited, and what I see when we're talking to business leaders gets them excited, because we all want purpose. We all want to know that our jobs make a difference and our positions make a difference. And certainly our businesses have to flourish, right? It's not an either or. It's not, well, I want my witness at work to be on fire, and meanwhile my business is floundering. No, our business is flourishing and prospering and being able to employ and care for people and exhibiting Christ in the way that we lead and engage and talk to people. It's a combo deal. You have to have both, or you have to push both forward. And can't forsake one or the other. Otherwise, we lose our opportunity to even have employees to influence, or we lose our opportunity to influence because our team sees us so focused on just the money that they forget that there's people there, at play. So that's what we get excited about. Again, not everybody has a pastor, but almost everybody has a boss.
Brian, since you're in the media business, share a little bit about the power of media and why that's so important in the place of business for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm certainly biased because we're in the media business, but it's pretty undeniable. I think you look around at our world today, and there are more screens in our world than people, right? Just think about that for a second. Whether it's the screen you hold in your pocket, or the screen that sits on your desk, or the screen that hangs in your family room. There's more screens in our world than people. So we are culturally very tuned in to getting information, inspiration, social interaction through that screen. So I like to think of it like this. If you kind of rewind the clock a little bit, 500 years ago, the printing press came along. This piece of technology, this new invention that all of a sudden, it changed the world. And not only did it change the world, but it changed the way the church acted and responded and was able to share the gospel. And because now you could put this Bible into print and distribute it in ways that could have never been done before. So it changed life. You fast forward 500 years and you think about, again, the technology that's in our hands today, and it's changing everything, and not always for the good, but it is changing everything. And so this printing press revolution that happened 500 years ago, now you have this digital revolution. And so we're just thrilled as a ministry to be right at the heart of that. We want to say, okay, how do you take and harness the power of that screen and put content in front of people that can help give them truth, give them answers, point them to not only practical help, but also ultimately point them to God. And so as a ministry for us, as we put those resources in the hands of a business leader, then that business leader can harness the power of that screen and say, okay, how do I then, as the business leader, put content in front of my team members that can not only help them flourish in work, but flourish at home as well? And so I just absolutely believe, that there's just huge power in media. And so one quick story. as you mentioned earlier, Bobby, I've got 4 kids. My wife and I met in high school, dated through college, got married after college. Um, you know, we were pretty new into our marriage within the first year or so, and we were going to this great church, had a small little Bible study class that we were going to with some other young couples. And my wife Julie and I just began saying, okay, God, what is it you would do in our new marriage? We kind of started to realize, man, we're really blessed. We came from families that really love us, parents that are still together. There's just a lot of stability and faith and love poured into our lives up to that point. And we thought, how are we going to make any difference in our married life now that we're this married couple? And we were going to that little Sunday school class at church, and there was the teacher was taking us through a marriage study. Pretty typical for a newly married class. And on one of those Sundays, we watched a video, and that video was of this younger couple that was taking care of some special needs adults. It was just a very sweet and inspirational little 2 or 3 minute story. And, Julie and I went on about the class. We went to, big church after that, and, had the sermon and the worship music and all the rest of the stuff that goes with church. But on the way home, both of us, as we were just kind of remembering back over the morning, that story is what stuck out to us. We just said, wow, what an inspiration, that young couple. And they were just doing something kind of beyond themselves. They didn't make their marriage just about themselves. They were really trying to serve others. Well, that little 2 or 3 minute video story, sitting in the kitchen of a class, the classroom that was meeting in the kitchen of the church in the back corner, put us on a path to going, okay, well, how would God use us then? And so we began exploring some things and praying, God, what would you do? And long story short, fast forwarding through it, we ended up, because of that video story, getting put on the path of foster parenting. We ended up becoming foster parents. 2 of our 4 kids we adopted through foster care. And it's all because God used that 2 minute little video one Sunday morning in a classroom. And the video wasn't about fostering. It wasn't about adoption. It was just an inspirational story that put us in the mindset of going, okay, God, if somebody was telling a story about Brian and Julie, how would our story not just reflect, again, a healthy marriage between us, but actually represent a marriage that's honoring Christ? And so I share that with you guys. I share that with all the new team members that come and work with us, because I just know that God is going to use media in a way that we would never even prescribe, but he does, because it is such a powerful tool. And so we know, and we're honored to be a part of that journey and to go, okay, how do we use media in a way that really can help inspire folks?
Brian, I can't wait till we get into the VIP backstage Q&A session, because I'm sure there's going to be more questions about how RightNow Media and RightNow Media at Work can help us as Christian business leaders to be more effective, in ministering to our employees. Brian, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to leave with us today?
Again, I feel like there's such an opportunity, especially in light of, let's see, I wrote down a statistic. Let me find it real quick, because it was so, I don't know if you want to say disheartening. So church attendance has, what they would call regular church attendance has declined from 47% to 36% over an 8-year period, meaning that, fewer and fewer people are regularly attending church. That's probably not a surprise to you. That's a Barna statistic. But that means that nearly in our country, 2/3 of our people are not attending church. Well, I always look at that and go, okay, that's an awful statistic. And yet, I think about the Christian business leaders out there who, again, every day, every week, they've got dozens or hundreds of people coming into their office, and they have some sort of leadership and influence over those 5 people or 50 people or 500 people. And again, if they're a Christian, I can't help but think, man, what an awesome opportunity God has put in front of us to say, how do we represent Christ to those folks who, again, percentages and statistics say are probably not going to church as much as they used to, or maybe not at all. And so therefore, what kind of opportunity do we have? I just think it's an awesome opportunity. So it's just, I just get excited about the opportunity that these Christian business leaders have, and there are tools available to us all as business leaders to learn and to be inspired and to put that faith into practice in our workspace. We just have to have the faith and obedience to do it.
Well, thank you, Brian, for sharing that. Brian, one of my I think one of my biggest takeaways today is seeing our work as worship. And I really like that, because I've come to know over the years that God is, see our whole life as a sacred life. Not, I mean, everything we do is sacred to him, not just when we go to church. And so I'm just thrilled to hear you talk about that. And by the way, if any of y'all have got some takeaway, please share it in the chat. I've already been seeing, Brian, I've been seeing some people, I've been watching the chat, and there's some people already been sharing some takeaways. So, Brian, could you also share where can people learn more about RightNow Media and RightNow Media at Work? And also, would you mind sharing the free gift that you're offering to the attendees today?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. I mean, again, our heart is to serve, and if what we're doing can serve some of the folks listening today, that's awesome. So we have two libraries of videos. One we call RightNow Media, and then go to rightnowmedia.org. And that's mainly for churches or ministries, and it's got video content that can be used kind of in those environments for small group Bible study and discipleship. And then we have a kind of a sister platform that we call RightNow Media at Work. And the web address is just rightnowmediaatwork.com. And that library is really curated for that business environment. And so when employees log in, they're going to see stuff about teamwork and leadership development and content that helps. The first content they will see is content that really helps you flourish in the business environment, work environment. But there's also great content in there on marriage and parenting and finance and mental health and things that, again, as a Christian leader, you may just say, look, again, I can't be your counselor, but I know that all of us go through questions about our marriage or have financial struggles or have mental health questions. I want to make this voluntary library available to my employees so that they can access this whenever they want, and hopefully there's content there that blesses them. That's our heart. That's our heart in creating that library. So that's how people can tune into us, or people listening today can connect with us. We do want to offer everybody that's listening today basically a free guest account that's going to give you access to what I think is some of our best content. Last year we produced a series called Finish with a great teacher named John Acuff. It's all about how to finish goals, to set goals appropriately, to finish those goals. So it's a perfect kind of content. And John's a great Christian. I mean, you're not going to listen to him and feel like you're listening to a sermon, because that's not his purpose. It's not to feel like a Bible study. But as a Christian, it influences all that he says and teaches. So it's a very easy thing to play in a company environment and say, hey, team, let's get around this idea of how are we going to set goals in the month ahead or the quarter ahead. And now you get to engage with your team, engage with that content, but then the team members also can get in and start to say, oh, I see some other content here, again, about marriage or parenting or finance or whatever that would really be helpful to me personally. So that's the gift we want to give is access to our library, and specifically to get that goals-oriented content called Finish. And I don't know, maybe we can put it in the link or an email, in the chat or an email, but basically if you go to rightnowmediaatwork.org/finish-acuff. Again, that's probably just ought to go into a chat, and I can put it there later or something, but you click on that link, it'll give you a chance to create a free profile to get that content in our library, and then you can use it however is best in your company.
Well, Brian, we've been putting that link into the chat. Bob Payton, who I'll introduce here for some final instructions, but he's been putting that in, and also Brady Bashir has put in the link in there as well. So, Brian, man, I just want to thank you, and I want to, for each of you who are here today, I want to thank you so much for being part of our day one of our Faith at Work 5-day virtual event. And let's all show our appreciation in the chat window, or simply just lift your hands for Brian, just, for being here today. And since today is our day one of this Faith at Work event, I want to learn from you. And so please feel free to contact me directly at bobbyalbert.com. And you should see the link in the chat here soon, but that's my email address. So please feel free to contact me if you've got something to share that we can make improvements to this faith at work. And I just want to also mention our guest speaker tomorrow is Rick Box, who is the CEO of Unconventional Business Network. And he'll talk about, guess what? What is an unconventional business? And may God bless you as you integrate the lordship of Jesus Christ into every area of your life, be it your family, your church, your workplace, and marketplace. And now I want to introduce Bob Payton for our final instructions.
If you do have a question for Brian, you can raise your hand there on Zoom, or you can put a question in the chat. We'll be watching it, and we'll call on you, or we'll go ahead and ask it whichever way you would like. But if you've got a question for Brian, he is ready now. And I see we've got Tony has raised his hand here. So
yes, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my question. One of the issues we've had here in Charleston is we have a fixed number of people. And when we start new organizations, it turns out that it's the same mix that are going to all the other Christian organizations. We've been trying to promote over the last few years an action group, a group that has one thing on its mind, and that's going out and getting something done, bringing in more people, bringing in it's perfectly obvious to me as an MTU, we're losing this battle. They're taking God out of the workplace. They're taking God out of school. You can't even have the 10 Commandments hanging in the courtroom anymore. We need to go out and try to get this back in an action kind of way. What do you recommend for us to take the bull by the horns and take actions on these issues?
I guess real quick follow-up question, I guess, would be when you say take action or starting organizations, are you mean like starting businesses or starting like networks of Christians? What are you starting?
What we did was we tried to collect all the Christian businesses doing work in the area and promoting other people. In other words, Christian businesses hiring Christian businesses to make the group bigger, stronger, more financially stable, so that when we went out and do something, we had the money to carry off different programs and a higher degree of success with carrying them out. So we're looking at everything. The other thing is I have a construction company, but I'm the only employee, but I hire a lot of other subcontractors. So I see to it that the subcontractors that work for me carry Christian values. And that goes on to the customers that buy our office buildings and houses and things like that. So there is a way to structure it so that your point gets across, but we need to have a plan for more action and less talk, the way I see it. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if I have any just real sage advice here, but I mean, I like putting things into action versus just sitting and talking about it. So, one of my thoughts anyways is I'm a big believer in the local church, and I know local churches are not always as quick to respond or as on board with the idea of how does faith and work intersect, but I just start to envision what would happen, if the local churches in an area were to say, you know what, we can teach and disciple in a way that helps the people of our church who are in business and who go to a job every day to be, again, those ambassadors. Then I guess what I hear you describing, Tony, is there's the Christians, there's those that already have the truth, and how do you help fortify and kind of strengthen that group? But there's also those that just don't know Christ, and how do you, as the subcontractor who's working alongside folks that don't know Christ, like how does your faith actually, become an attractive thing even to those around you? So I don't know if I have any sage advice other than just again, I'm a big believer in the local church and trying to help encourage and even challenge pastors or leaders of the church to say, hey, are we validating the business people in our congregation? Are we telling them that their mission and their job and their 9 to 5 matters? Or are we acting like the only time that their life is significant is when they come to church on Sunday morning? So that's a big perspective change for a lot of people and even pastors. But until that happens, and I think it doesn't happen in one big swoop, I think it happens over time. But until that happens, I think people sometimes, again, live in this two-sided world where they don't know how their day-to-day really can be kind of an action-oriented thing for Christ.
Well, I
Okay.
don't mean to monopolize this conversation, but sometimes the greatest impediment to getting everybody together is the church. You have all these different organizations out there and they all want to do their own thing. We have a big Christian ministries group in our town, and they kind of drop the religious thing and all work together. We have the business community and they drop all the organized religious and work together. We need something to get everybody working together
All
and
right.
expanding.
All right. Well, thank you for that question today, and let's do keep it moving, and starting something else is kind of the key here. Alexa Valor wrote, "Do you have any advice for anyone just starting a business?" And somebody followed up that said, "Read John Acuff's book Twitter as a starting point, Brian." But do you want to join in that with any advice for anyone just starting a business?
Well, there's a few resources that I'm aware of that I think are helpful, especially for that entrepreneurial, startup business mindset. There's a program, I think it's based in Cincinnati, but they have a national footprint called Oceans. They have several resources that are about that kind of entrepreneurial mindset. And then another group that's similar, but just as a different group, is called Faith Driven Entrepreneur. There's a man named Henry Kasner who's a successful businessman. He's built a team around him to say, how do we help these entrepreneurs who are starting businesses have faith built into their businesses even as they start. And both of those organizations I think do a good job of balancing not only how do you be faithful in your leadership, but how do you make your business work? Because again, it does no good to have a very faith-oriented business that's failing, because now you don't have those employees, or you don't have that opportunity to create value for the community and value in the economy. So I appreciate that both of them have a sense of how do we help you very practically start your business in a way that can make sense, but also as a Christian do it with the mindset. So again, faith-driven entrepreneur is one, and then there's a program. I think if you were just to search Oceans or Oceans Entrepreneur, I think you'd probably find some stuff from those guys as well.
Terrific. Thanks so much for that, Brian. And Bobby, I know you're in the room with us now, so if you want to take back over and talk some more, and I'll keep looking here.
Yeah, sure. Brian, would you mind sharing a little bit more about the video library that you have for the RightNow Media at work? Because I know that, I mean, you have a huge host of videos, because I've even used them in my personal life. I've even used them to teach a Bible study at my church. So would you mind sharing a little more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say briefly, there's kind of three audiences that we're trying to aim to serve. One would be that Christian CEO or business owner. So maybe many of you guys that are on this call, and the content we're trying to help you with is, what are some stories and or teaching that directly relates to you're kind of at the top level of leadership and you're trying to figure out how does your faith intersect with your leadership position. So that's category one. Next level of content would be kind of like I described in that prior session about the finish goal setting content. It's content that as a Christian or as a business leader, you feel very comfortable putting in front of your team, whether your team is Christian or non-Christian, because you know the content is going to help them flourish at work, but you also know as a Christian that the content is being delivered by a Christian. So if they go and start to Google, well, who is this John Acuff guy? You're not going to find that he's some, kind of crazy wacko guy. You're going to go, oh, it's a Christian guy, and so that just helps further align that, hey, Christians, even Christians in business, can provide good business-oriented content. So that second category is kind of just to the general audience within a company that is looking for leadership and professional development. And then the third category that we're trying to serve is just us as humans, if I can make it sound that broad. I mean, again, it's like I said, marriage, parenting, finance. I mean, there's certainly Bible study content in that library as well, but we know that not every person's waking up this morning going, oh, I just wish I could study the book of John, but that non-Christian may be waking up going, again, my spouse and I are having trouble, or man, I just don't know how to parent this teenager in my house. And so maybe some of that content can start to meet a felt need, and then I'll introduce them to the fact that, hey, this content's coming from a Christian perspective. So now you get a sense of who Christ is through this content.
All right. Cynthia Hash, we've unmuted you there so that you had a question about pushback on Christian businesses.
Yes, because I believe that there's a huge force amongst us. Obviously, we know who that is, but you can't. The previous fellow, what's his name? Tony, I believe, said that he looks for Christian subcontractors and so forth, and I would love to be able to have just nothing but Christian folks on my team or working with those as well, but I can't. So literally there would be a target on my back as watch. She's violating fair housing, that kind of thing. If I were to search for agents and vendors who are, Christian only, I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure where I know where all this is coming from. First of all, the devil. Secondly, the fact that there's a tremendous amount of business owners, who would also like to do that, but get thrown to the curb and literally have gone out of business because they've made their desire known like that. So I don't know how you fight it. I just try and stay as neutral as possible. But I do offer like a Bible study once a month that right before our team meeting. And I, just say it's optional. And so only a portion of my team, shows up. That's the only way I know how to do it. And if you have any other ideas, let me know.
Well, I guess a couple quick thoughts. I don't know what day it is, but you're going to have some folks come through this week as far as guest speakers on this week's events that are going to be more experienced and knowledgeable about kind of the legal aspects of things. And so would really encourage you to tune back in. Again, I don't know what day that is, but there's going to be some folks that can speak to that.
Yes. Thank you very much, Brian. Yes, it's Friday where we have a guy, he's the Deputy General Counselor at First Liberty. His name is Hiram Sasher. And this is what he deals in is he's going to be talking about what's legal and what's not legal. And he's a personal friend of mine, as well as Kelly Shackford, who's president of First Liberty. So tune back in if you would, please.
But let me also say this, because again, that's not my area of expertise, but listen, this may be easier said than done. And you guys may not agree with this, but I would challenge you guys to also think about the fact that to say that you only want to hire Christians or you only want to work with Christians is a little bit like saying I only want Christians to come to my church. How do people who don't know Christ come to know Christ if in our world we say to ourselves, the only people I want to work with are Christians? And that goes back to, again, what I was trying to share earlier. God's put you in a position that is so powerful, so powerful. You have the opportunity to be around folks that aren't going to walk in the doors of that church this coming Sunday. So now the question isn't, how do I avoid those people? The question is, God, you put me on mission to be in front of those people. How do I do it? Not just how do I witness to them, not how do I hand them a spiritual track and say, how do I convert them? But how do I lead them? How do I befriend them? How do I, care about them in a way that all of a sudden, or maybe not all of a sudden, over time, God says, oh, this is one that I'm bringing into the kingdom, and I use you to do it. They weren't walking through the doors of that church on Sunday. So I would also just challenge you. Yes, we want to work, with Christians or try to help support each other as Christians, but man, go to your pastor and say, Pastor, I only want Christians to show up to church this Sunday. Is that okay if we close the doors and filter that? I don't think he's going to say yes to that. So I'm going to challenge you, don't filter your audience and say, I only want to work with Christians or serve Christians or whatever, because that to me, it saps the power that God's given you, which is to be in a position of influence. So that, I know it's easier said than done, and there's a lot of ramifications in there, but just as a principle, I don't know, that's just something that I would challenge you to think about.
Brian, if I may reach in to hear, Cynthia, one other thing to I go all the way back to 1987 of seeing my work as a ministry and not a job. And I did just what you were talking about, is I started a Bible study for employees. And it was purely volunteer. And actually that's okay legally, as long I cannot, that's one of the things we'll learn as a condition of employees' employment, that they had to attend the Bible study. You can't do that, and I wouldn't want to do that anyway. But we hired people to be the best people for that qualified for the job, their character qualities as well as their competence. But one thing that we did when we were hiring people, because our director of human resource, he would talk with a potential new employee and say, look, the CEO of this company is a strong Christian, and he pretty open about his faith. And are you going to feel comfortable coming to work for somebody like that? Well, to be honest with you, we actually had a couple people turn us down, but that's okay. But see, we're not asked, you can't ask, are you a Christian? Because that's the only one we hire. So we didn't know who was a Christian or who wasn't, but we had over 150 employees, but our ministry grew so big that we had to hire an extra person in our human resource just to manage all the logistics. Because not only were we ministering to employees, but we figured out ways to minister to customers and even suppliers. Tony, you was talking about, hiring contract, but we even figured ways how to minister to even suppliers. And we call them suppliers, but we had more business than we could handle. So we had to subcontract business all over the country and even internationally as well. So there's ways of doing it. And I realize today we don't have time to go into all of that, but thank you for bringing those up. And hopefully we'll see you again on Friday where you can talk to Hiram then. So any other questions, Bob?
Yes, we've got Alan Barker unmuted. So Alan, you can ask your question.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Brian. Through your company and the types of content that you make available and the connections that you have with people in the workplace all across, I guess, America, and possibly more than that, what do you see as the current sort of status of things? Are we struggling as Christians in the workplace to really be those lifestyle evangelists, if you want to use the word, but just to make those connections via our work? Or do you feel like there's been real progress? Do you feel like how are things going? Do you see that there's been significant progress, or are we really just struggling, especially right now? What do you think?
I mean, I think we have a long way to go, but I am encouraged. I mean, I've, Bobby mentioned being at this, for 30 some years. I mean, I'm, shorter at it as far as my time and thinking specifically about this faith and work stuff. But I would say even in the 6 or 8 years that I've been involved, and not because of what we're doing in particular, but just seeing things, I do feel like there's great progress. I mean, I think there's conversations like this today that probably weren't happening, 4 or 5 years ago. And that's encouraging. That means, the folks that are here today with us, you guys are at least encouraged and interested, right? And that's a great step in the right direction. There's so many great ministries. I mean, some of which are on here today with Larry and, what Bobby's doing. And you guys are going to hear from others throughout the week that there's great ministries that are at every kind of turn and facet ready to help business leaders. And that's, I think, super encouraging. And so I say there's a long way to go though, because, think of other kind of issues or causes that have really flooded through the church. And one that comes to my mind, again, I told you guys earlier a little bit of my personal story about adoption, but for a while, adoption was just fostering adoption was a huge kind of movement within the church. And that's an awesome thing. And I don't even know all the ways and reasons why it became such a prominent thing, but it was almost every church, in any community, was going to have some sort of initiative or they'd raise the flag for adoption. Well, we're not anywhere close to that on this issue of faith and work. And yet, again, look at the potential. I mean, everybody sitting out there in the pews, work impacts those people in some way, shape, or form. You're either going to work, or maybe you're a spouse that sends your spouse to work. But if that spouse doesn't have a job, it impacts everybody, you know. So I think the church, again, has a long way to go. But even in the church, I'm seeing a lot of encouraging things of pastors and resources and conferences and things happening that are specifically trying to address how do we disciple people to think about their work differently than we've probably taught in the past. So all I have to say, I'm encouraged, but there's still a long way to go.
Brian, if I might add another point here, Alan, this is what you're bringing up and what Brian is commenting on is the reason why we are having this 5-day work, faith at work event is because to introduce people to organizations that they've never heard of before. And they just like Brian said, it will amaze you the number of resources out there that are doing things in a different way, you know, like what RightNow Media at work is doing. So, and I'm really encouraged as well because many years ago, I went to 50 business people in my city that were considered Christians. And it shocked me because I was sharing with them about our work of as worship ministry, like Brian's talking about. But what surprised me, the message was about the same with all of them. Bobby, what I do at church is at church, but what I do in business is business. In other words, they were living their life in compartments. And it really broke my heart because I thought this was going to be easy, an easy message. But the message of seeing your work as worship is getting easier and easier because more people are beginning to see things different all the time. Bob, you got maybe one more question.
Well, we do. I don't think we're going to have time to answer it, but Bonnie Beach is asking if anyone knows how to start a nonprofit organization and how to get funds employees for it. That's a big question there. But Brian, maybe you can point, say a couple of pitfalls that you run into that you wouldn't want anybody else to run into as they start. And Bonnie, take this advice and talk with somebody that can give you legal and or accounting advice would be the best way to get started because applying for those 501c3s is a tough deal. But Brian, any quick little tips?
Yeah, I mean, a couple quick thoughts. One is I don't know today, obviously the area of interest and focus you're trying to do for a nonprofit, but I would just right off the bat challenge you, is it needed? I mean, there's a lot of nonprofits out there, there's a lot of groups, and there's the potential to create one more thing that's doing something kind of similar to this other thing that all of a sudden you guys are competing for resources. So the first question would just be, is it needed? But if it's clear that it's needed and God's laid that on your heart and there's a clear pathway forward, then go for it. There's no easy advice for how you start it. I mean, I was not a part of starting this ministry, so I don't have that firsthand knowledge of what it was like. We are a nonprofit, but we actually don't require any donations for what we do, and so we're different than some nonprofits in that regard. We sustain ourselves off of the subscriptions that we offer. There's probably lots of resources out there that could help. I mean, one that you may or may not be familiar with is the ECFA, Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. And they have some good resources simply on making sure you're setting up boards appropriately and setting up your finances appropriately. And I mean, they may not be a how-to manual, but you certainly don't want to mess up some of the basics of fundraising, of finances, and of boards. And the ECFA is the group that can do that. So that's my quick little advice.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. And then real quick, we'll remind everyone again as we go ahead and paste the link in here about everyone got to come backstage today to kind of experience what it's like. This is what we mean by getting up close and personal with these outstanding guests that Bobby has lined up. But the link is right there in the chat right now. If you want to go to that website, you can get the pass to get access to backstage for all the guests that remain this week. And then then you'll have that. And of course, we know all of these are going to be great, but we've already heard some people going to be real interested in Friday's session and some of that legal advice. So follow that link. You can do that, and every day you'll be able to come backstage with us with our guests. Bobby, I'll turn it back over to you to close out.
Okay, boy, I've been watching in the chat. If there's anyone else that enjoyed this question and answer time, please share some of your comments there. Any kind of special takeaway from this Q&A session. And I want to thank again Brian Mosley and each one of you for joining us today in this VIP backstage Q&A session. And again, if you would with me, let's show Brian our appreciation in either in the chat window or just simply raise your hand or something and for Brian. And thank you, Brian, for being here. And like Bob Payton was just mentioning, is that today was a special treat to be able to ask our guest speakers these types of questions that come every day that's occurring today. And today's VIP backstage session is free, but you'll want to grab, just like Bob put in there, the VIP backstage pass to attend these special Q&A sessions for the rest of the week. You'll find that link in the chat window. And but one thing I want to mention is this backstage pass is available for purchase until tomorrow night, Tuesday night. And all the proceeds will be donated to our guest speakers, nonprofit organizations. And a couple other comments is that just remember our guest speaker tomorrow is Rick Box, who is the CEO of Unconventional Business Network. And may God bless you. And we'll see you tomorrow for day 2. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you guys very, very much. Appreciate it.